Okay, everyone, now we're getting into a rather extensive overview of the firepower threat defense packet processing. Nothing better in our industry than to explain something with a flow chart, so let's get right on into it. We're starting off here on the bottom left with the ingress interface packet processing. And by the way, one of the things I really like about this overview is all the while we're either going to show you inside of the GUI or we're going to show you in the command line how you can validate almost every single one of these steps. So again, we can do a show interface, interface designation, and then the detail to see any kinds of hardware-based encoding, decoding, receive, and transmit buffers, input and output queue information. From there, we're going to go into any kind of defragmentation policy. Now let me pause, because there are actually two fragmentation, defragmentation policies that you can configure. This one here is going to be on the appliance. So for example, the firepower appliance level itself. So a physical interface policy. Folks, the idea here is no matter, for example, how large a packet might be, there are some minimum packet sizes that must be met. And if we always adhere to the minimum packet size, there should never be any more fragments than X number. So we can literally go in here and define the number of packets in a series of fragments, or what's referred to as the chain, the actual size of those fragments, and the timeout from the time the first fragment in the chain was received to the time the last one is going to be received. So I want to say it again, this is on the appliance and interface defragmentation policy. Then we check, is this packet going to be part of an existing session, any kinds of existing connections? And we can view that with the show capture command on the firepower interface. Then after the existing connection check is complete, we look to any policies or any settings for decrypting the VPN. Now let me pause for a moment, because when we say VPN, that's a pretty vague term, because there are many different kinds of virtual private networks. Is it going to be an IKE v1, IKE v2? Is it going to be our site-to-site, our remote access? Is it going to be any kind of web-based, so SSL, TLS-based? Please keep in mind, with all these different ways that we're able to establish a VPN, this is only going to be in tunnel mode, or said another way, not in transport mode. And then also please keep in mind, we do not support some of the other, I say for lack of a better word, more advanced VPN options that you might find on a router-based VPN deployment, such as GetVPN, Dynamic Multi-Point VPN, and EasyVPN. Those again are not supported here in this packet processing. All right, now we're getting into our unnatting of any kinds of egress interface sessions. And as we said, one of my favorite things about this packet progression, the slide progression, is we're able to show you along the way how we can validate that either at the command line or inside of the GUI. So again, we can do a show capture on that egress interface in question to see again what kind of NAT processing is happening on that interface. Now let's pause. If again this was part of an established session, a part of established session, that packet can be what's referred to as fastpath. And pause again, because when we get into the access control policies, we'll show you how you can statically set certain traffic types to be fastpath. But bottom line is, we're able to look at the packet information, compare it to any kinds of pre-filter policies to see if we do end up want to fastpath that traffic. Again, coming up real soon. Now we get into our classic layer 3, layer 4 ACLs. And speaking of coming up soon, we're going to go into this concept even deeper. We have several topics just on access list configuration. But very, very high level, we have our mandatory rules that they're showing us here with our very, very classic 5-tuple. So at a layer 3 address perspective, layer 4 protocol and port perspective, we're able to go through and validate this session, this packet, against any kinds of access control list rules. Once we're done with that, please remember, we mentioned this briefly earlier, and my goodness, are we going to go even deeper. But we're able to then, once the traffic has been validated, permitted for lack of a better word, by the access control list, the access control policy, we're able to define so many other actions on this traffic. One of them is going to be to look through the snort instance in what's referred to as a data acquisition library. This is literally information on the packet combined, put together by communities, and will process this packet as the packet is flowing through the appliance, and then also even the advanced inspection engine. So there are actually multiple snort engines that are possible, multiple snort instances that are available for processing this kind of deeper packet inspection based upon your firepower model. Then from there, we continue on with any kinds of layer 2 or layer 4 decoding. And let me pause again. What I said I really like about this slide flow is we show you either at the command line or in the GUI what is being checked at each level. So folks, there are actual policy settings that we can go through for how to treat the decoding of the packet. So do I want to detect any excessive links, any valid IP options? There are a lot of attacks, especially classic attacks, that are launched against IP options that modern day should just never exist. Also, are there any other TCP options that are currently not being used or known malicious TCP options, and any kinds of anomalies in the protocol header? So we're able to decode, for lack of a better word, simply because we're looking at the packet layer 2, layer 3, layer 4 headers and checking them against any kinds of decoding policies that we've configured. Now we're getting into a concept, a feature known as security intelligence. Folks, simply put, security intelligence allows us to go in and apply a blacklist of traffic types that, again, should never be allowed. As we were talking a little bit earlier in a previously recorded topic, blacklist of traffic that, hands down, without any other question about it, this kinds of traffic should not be allowed in our environment. And by the way, keep in mind, of course, that a whitelist can actually override a blacklist. And what's so nice is that these blacklists can actually be downloaded from what is officially known as Cisco Talos Intelligence Feed, or again, a custom list by you can be created. All right, continuing on with the defrag policy. You might remember from very early on in this packet flow, I mentioned, hey, there are going to be 2 places we apply a defrag policy, and they actually are looking at different aspects of defragmenting packets. Well, folks, if you remember, this was more on the physical firewall or the appliance interface level, while this up here is going to be based upon the operating system of the source of the packet. And just hit the I believe Isaac button, but different operating systems will handle fragmentation of traffic slightly differently. So folks, what we're able to do is on an IP defragmentation setting is we're able to go in and define that our multitude, the lion's share of our systems in our environment are Windows-based systems, and we're able to define a defragment policy for the source based upon the most common types of operating systems on our network. All right, if your traffic is SSL TLS encrypted, we're able to, as we will talk about in a different topic coming up soon, we're able to apply an SSL TLS decrypt policy. So again, I could leave this traffic encrypted and pass it on, which of course would mean we would have less visibility and therefore less control. But this might be a scenario where, because of a compliancy, we have to do encryption end to end and not decrypt it here within inside of our firepower appliance. Folks, our intelligence, the security intelligence that we mentioned earlier, gives us the ability to offer, as you might remember, whitelist and or blacklist options based upon many different flow criteria. So again, I'm able to go in under a DNS level and provide security intelligence options. Maybe I'm just interested in monitoring what's going on based upon a particular domain. Maybe I want to go in and identify if a domain is not known or a domain is not found. Or we're able to just do an all-out drop of packets for a session based upon a DNS domain. We can also go in with our URL filtering options. One more time, blanket define URLs that are going to be allowed, or blacklist, blanket define URLs that are not going to be allowed, but truly block them, or a blacklist of URLs that we just want to monitor activity to those URLs. Now, continuing on with the identity policy, what this is simply doing is giving us the ability to identify the user in this session. The user can be identified either actively or passively. Folks, actively being literally what is referred to, as you can see here on the slide, as a captive portal. So we could have the user first go to a website and provide login credentials. Or if we're in an environment where our users are not able to follow yet another step, we want to keep things as simple as possible for our users, or we don't want to change the current flow of how they do things, then we can go in and do a passive authentication. And the appliance, for example, the Firepower with Threat Defense appliance, has the ability to integrate maybe with a defined ICE server, or again with an LDAP integration. And for example, with ICE, query ICE to see if this user is already logged in. So once again, an active, for example, through a captive portal, or passive through a tie-in between the Firepower appliance and an identity services engine definition. Now, continuing on with our application filtering and URL filtering mechanisms. So this gives us the ability to go even deeper still than just our normal 5-tuple that we would see inside of an access list, but also go even deeper into what is the application doing and what are some of the details of the destination URL that the user is trying to access. So guys, simply put, we have another subject, another topic on this, therefore another recording coming up a little bit later where we go deeper into some of the advanced options that are available inside of our access control list. Now, getting into quality of service, please note how we have two different boxes, two different rectangles in this packet processing, this flow. Because again, it could be to classify and then later enforce the quality of service mechanism. Folks, let me pause for a second because number one, we have an entire topic just on quality of service. What I always like to tell people, and I'll tell you this also coming up later, is quality of service is an absolute suite of services. It's many different things. It could be, for example, our classification, prioritization, rate limiting. It could even be dropping. But what it can also be is marking. I want to take this traffic that I've identified, let's say by a simple protocol import, and I want to classify it. I want to put it into a certain category. Maybe what I want to do is mark it by changing its differentiated services code point, its DSCP, inside of the IP type of service byte. And I want to say it again, we have an entire topic just on quality of service, so we will go deeper into this subject. All we're trying to let you know now is, again, quality of service, whether it is simply marking or classifying, and then later doing something based upon the classification with respect to our policy. But simply put for now, quality of service is two different mechanisms at least, and what mechanism you're implementing at this time is going to vary based upon where you are in this packet processing. All right, continuing on. You might remember from our introduction topic earlier in the sequence of recordings that we have the ability with our Firepower Threat Defense appliances to map our network, discover things like host addresses, operating systems, services that are running, and even more. We'll have an entire subject on this coming up a little bit later, but we have the ability to do a network discovery of systems and details about those systems. Additionally, we can do our file policy with the advanced malware protection, identifying things like what kinds of actions do we want to take on our specific files, and what kinds of files we may want to permit or restrict. And if for whatever reason malware is identified as being in this traffic in this particular file, we're able to identify different kinds of actions against the detected malware. A lot of really wonderful and very technical processing against the details of our packet. Now a little bit more, we can even go deeper still with various snort rules, maybe an intrusion prevention policy. Also, an action based upon that particular snort rule. So I want to be very clear, guys, this is going to be an action that is determined or kicked off by the ACP, the Access Control Policy. So again, this is going to be another mechanism, another feature that we can add to our traffic once the access list is done processing it. Now, based upon the output or that verdict, as you heard us say a moment ago, we're able to, you might remember, circle all the way back here to our DAQ operation, which once again, based upon the verdict of the snort module, that could be, again, to pass the traffic, outright blacklist the traffic, or to fast forward the traffic. So we have different actions, different, I like the keyword verdict from that snort policy, that snort rule. Again, we have our ALG checks, or our application layer gateway checks, giving us the ability to go very similar to the old school modular policy framework, but the ability to do a class map, a policy map, and a service policy. Or folks, going back to the classic modular policy framework, I always like to explain this as, what traffic am I talking about? That traffic, for example, classification that we mentioned earlier. How do I want to treat that traffic? Again, with our policy map. And then where do I want to apply it with our service policy? So the classic modular policy framework has been around for a very, very long time, available in your router platform, your switch platform, of course here in your firewall, firepower platform, giving us the ability to categorize traffic, define how to treat that traffic, all in a policy, and then apply that policy, for example, to an interface. All right, continuing on with our packet processing, now that we're done with our application level gateway checks, we're getting into network address translation. So here we are officially on the outbound manner, in the outbound direction. Once again, the packet has been permitted to flow through the appliance with all these other checks. We're going to have to go through and translate the IP information inside of the IP header. So once again, back into the command line, we can do our show capture, and we see that this traffic has to be natted, and we're natting it against this configuration rule. We see our VPN encryption. Let's say that this packet flow is destined from the corporate site to a branch site across an IPsec tunnel. Well, in our IPsec topics to follow, we can do a show crypto IPsec SA. Very high level, don't worry, because we're going to go into this even deeper still when we get into this specific topic. But SA stands for Security Association, or an agreement between two peers, two devices. Well, folks, we can see again what traffic is deemed interesting and why are we going to protect it across the tunnel. We can see our local tunnel source, tunnel destination, and we can even see, without going into this in too much detail because we have an entire topic just dedicated on this, but I'm able to see my encapsulated and de-encapsulated, or protected and verifying the protection of our packets. Then we get closer and closer to finishing up this entire packet processing with, all right, now that I see that the traffic has been permitted and it has been processed on an egress manner, now I need to identify where am I going to send this packet. So folks, this is a classic 101 level. Let's look into the routing table. Maybe the routing information is statically populated or dynamically populated, but we're able to see especially with the show capture command again, how we can do a route lookup and we see the valid next hop and an egress interface. Last but not least, now that we know the egress interface to go out of, if I may geek out on you just for one moment, I've already warned you before that I really, really like the OSI model, and I explain a lot of things with the OSI model. So again, we have our physical layer, our data link layer, our network layer. I'm just going to keep it simple there, layer 1, layer 2, and layer 3. We're way too close to the end of this topic to go super geeky into OSI right now. Guys, the network layer right here is what provided us with our next hop IP address based upon our destination subnet. Well, it also provided us with our egress interface. So excuse me for one moment, let me just back up. Again, my next hop, that's layer 3 information. My egress interface, that's layer 1 information. So now what we have to do is literally bridge that information with finding out what is the MAC information. So now we can fully reassemble, fully craft our packet before it goes out of the egress interface. So this is going to be, if I may oversimplify this, verifying ARP information. So we do a show ARP and we see, yes, and excuse me, let me do this one more time. You need to go to 77.40 out of the outside interface. Well, 77.40, according to our ARP table, has this particular MAC address. So again, with that information, you're able to now fully assemble the egress packet to be transmitted. Whew, that was some really, really good technical information. The geek in me really likes that kind of stuff. But a multi-slide review of the packet processing, all the different features. Granted, these features were high level because we still have to go over many of them throughout this video series. But the step-by-step of what functions and what features took place where, and a very high level, almost marketing overview of each of them. I'm going to end it here. I think we've said enough. Thank you very much for watching.